Edvan, welcome to Amsterdam. Let me start.
There are a couple of people still here. Thank you.
I'd say more than a couple. Now that the film is done, do you fear Mr. Bannon more than you did before? You did fear him. You mentioned that in the film.
There's, for me, a demonic element here. A man who really wants to destroy things, but it's not clear that there's any kind of program for what you do after everything has been destroyed. I mean, at the end of the ring cycle, and this does have a Wagnerian quality for me. Well, you know, Brunhilde is consumed with her horse in a big flaming pyre, and the Rhine overflows, and the world is cleansed. I don't think that Wagnerian solution works for the world at large. Maybe it does, but I'm not sure it's such a great idea for the world at large. I'm reminded that fascism isn't a program really for what to do after you take over. It's a program to get control, to somehow subvert everything and to take control.
In that case, he lost control, as far as we know, in the White House. He lost control at Breitbart. His European projects, you know, is not really going well. So in that case, perhaps you do fear him less than when you started out with the film. He lost a lot of his mojo.
I'm still afraid. I'm sorry.
Fair enough. We'll talk about that in a second, and we'll talk about Mr. Bannon and how you...
Maybe I'm like Chicken Little. I think that the sky is falling.
Right.
But I would not say, despite the results of the midterm elections, that America is out of the forest. I don't know which way the country is ultimately going, and I don't know how much damage the country has incurred as a result of this presidency.
Why did you decide to focus on Mr. Bannon particularly? You could have made a film about Trump. And when did you decide that? Was that during the campaign or as soon as you knew that they won?
As soon as the book, Michael Wolff's Fire and Fury, was released, which was at the beginning of this year, it was January of 2016, and it is clear that Bannon was the principal source of all of this information about the Trump administration. Also, I'd never made movies about the central figures. I didn't make a movie about George W. Bush. I didn't make a movie about Johnson. Kennedy, of course, was not available to be interviewed for reasons which I'm sure you are all familiar with. Somehow I do like these, I don't even want to call them secondary characters.
They're all crucial, whether it's Robert McNamara or Donald Rumsfeld or Steve Bannon. They're all pretty crucial figures in their own time, right?
That's correct.
Did he say, I mean, he's a very vain person. Did he agree to do this right away? I think you spoke with him for about 16 hours. Was he immediately sold on this idea?
I'd like to tell everyone here that I used my great persuasive abilities to convince him to make this film with me, but that wouldn't be true. He wanted to make it. He was flattered. He was excited. I went down to Washington, D.C. I live in Cambridge, Massachusetts. It's a 2-hour flight away. And I went to what is colloquially known as the Breitbart Embassy. I'm not sure what it's an embassy to.
It's his house and office on Capitol Hill.
It's very close to the Supreme Court, 4 or 5 doors down from the Supreme Court. And
he was sold.
You know, I thought maybe he's moving out. He had lost his job with Trump. He had lost his job at Breitbart, but he was very much ensconced at the Breitbart Embassy holding court. And he agreed to come to Boston to make the film with me.
Because that is where you built the set in Massachusetts, outside of Boston.
Just outside of Boston, Alston.
One more thing about the technique of the film, because with the Rumsfeld film and the Fog of War, the Magnum era film, you use the Interrotron, is that what it's called? Your
yes.
design camera technique, where the character is looking right into the camera, or at least seems to be looking right into the lens while you interview him, and that also means that you see every doubt or hesitation in Robert McNamara's face or Rumsfeld's face. I don't think Rumsfeld had a lot of doubts, but you know what I mean? You could have done that with Steve Bannon, but you decided not to. Why is that? I know you don't use it in every film, but this could have been the one.
I used it in every film for a while. Maybe I just don't want to see myself as a one-trick pony. I had made a series for Netflix, 6-part series, Wormwood. At least someone here has seen it. And I did not use the Interrotron. I used multiple cameras. In some instances, as many as 10 cameras in an interview. And we talked about it. We went back and forth. Since I decided to put Bannon in the middle of his favorite movie, 12 O'Clock High, we built a set based on the Quonset hut where Gregory Peck addresses his pilots and says, I mean, it's a great line. Consider yourself dead. It's almost like a theater of the mind, a way of entering Bannon's head. And I liked the fact that the camera was essentially showing it as a set. It was Bannon in the context of this dream. And the Interrotron did not seem to be the best device to achieve that end. The same reason that I put him in this set with Donald Trump's inaugural address.
What was the main...
His first and I hope only.
Sorry?
His first and I hope only inaugural address.
Let's see. 6 more years, who knows? I won't get you started. I guess the thing with Steve Bannon is, and I suppose, but I guess it's a question, I suppose it's one of the questions you had in the beginning as well, whether he means what he says, to what extension does he mean what he says, and to what extension does he's very vain, he likes the attention, and to what extent is he just bullshitting for his own ego or for a very nihilistic goal of blowing up politics? How sincere is he in his beliefs?
This is a question you could ask of almost anybody. Although I would have to say that sincerity is not a word that I immediately connect with Stephen K. Bannon.
But you know what I mean.
I do know what you mean. We actually talked about it before the movie tonight.
These people were not here, so let's do it again.
I just want them to be aware of that fact. It's a question you can ask endlessly without securing an answer. Part of being an effective salesman, if that's what you're doing, and I think that is what you're doing, is believing in what you're selling. You know, you believe that your vacuum produces more suction than brand X. And believing that is just, if you like, a tool to selling more vacuums. But if you really believe it's true, perhaps you can be even more effective in selling those vacuums. I don't know. I'm not sure I really have a good purchase on how the human mind works, including my own, I might add. It's a gray area.
But was it indeed one of the questions you had in the beginning? I mean, this is a guy who worked in Hollywood for a long time. You know, like you say, he is a salesman. He has been a salesman, whether it's selling Trump or whether it's selling movies. I mean, I assume you did try to get during those 16 hours of interview to the core of his beliefs, or not?
Well, of course I tried. Going back to our conversation before the screening tonight, one thing that did really, really interest me, this question is he sincere? Well, there are things that he clearly is sincere about. Does he really love 12 O'Clock High? Does he really love Bridge on the River Kwai? Does he really love Chimes at Midnight? Does he love these movies? Yes. Is he in the grip of Hollywood fiction? Yes, maybe we all are to some extent. But there was another thing that fascinated me while making the movie, and still fascinates me, is the interpretation of movies just up for grabs? Is it, I'm sure this is the wrong use of the word, fungible? You know, can you exchange it for anything? So in Chimes at Midnight, I look at that movie, and you've heard the exchange in American Dharma. I don't think Henry V is treating Falstaff very well. It's very sad. And Orson Welles / Sir John Falstaff, to me, looks kind of sad. Can't approach the king closer than 10 Mile, or he'll be executed. Is that what it comes really down to in the end? Just dharma, duty, destiny? Can't you justify anything that way? Is it all just the fulfillment of some inexorable machine that runs in back of history and we do its bidding? When I saw 12 O'Clock High for the first time, just before going down to visit Bannon in Washington, I asked myself, could this be a Nazi film? Yeah, they're all in service of winning the war against Nazi Germany. But where is right and wrong in these stories? And when I try even to get close to that issue, when we talk about the Bridge on the River Kwai, you know, he retreats, I would say, to some kind of platitude. Well, we could be wrong. What I'm doing could be destructive. And then immediately segues to Lucifer in Milton's Paradise Lost. he loves Lucifer. Lucifer among...
Why, you wonder?
Lucifer among... Milton is a very good writer. Says, evil be thou my good. And you get the feeling, I get the feeling, I would have to ask the audience here to correct me if I'm wrong. I could even ask you. Do you get the feeling that he has happily embraced evil, that it's beyond a question of right and wrong?
He has embraced his image, and even his image of Dr. Evil. You were asking, do you think he embraced evil?
It's like, I'd rather reign in hell than serve in heaven.
But he also, like anything he says, meant that in a very provocative way, I'm sure.
Yes.
I want to talk about interviewing Steve Bannon.
But I might add,
Okay.
the only person who I've ever interviewed, and I've interviewed a lot of nasty characters in my day, who's ever just enthusiastically embraced my comparison of him, my protagonist, whoever that might be, to Satan. It doesn't happen every day.
I'm sure you don't compare all your interview subjects to Satan.
I haven't done it in your case.
Right, okay. No, not yet.
And you're not a subject.
Not yet.
Yes.
The evening is still
Shoe is
long.
on the other foot.
When you interview Steve Bannon, you get a whole lot of crap. People say you're offering Steve Bannon, not just you, but in general. David Remnick, the editor of The New Yorker, invited Steve Bannon on stage at the New Yorker Festival. Everybody got angry and he disinvited him. I myself interviewed him for our TV program for a couple of hours over the summer, and well, some people were happy with it, many people were not. They said, just don't give this guy the floor. It's also about how you interview him. You said something about this before the screening. You are basically saying, how can you not want to interview this guy, right?
Part of the job of, and I do see myself as being a filmmaker, but also a journalist. A part of being a journalist is talking to people and investigating people. It's not pretending that they're not there. You know, we could argue endlessly about the benefits of, it's one of my favorite nonsense words, deplatforming. Deplatforming Bannon.
Right, exactly.
Good or bad. I think what's going on in the world at the moment, in America in particular, has to be dealt with. It can't be ignored. How you deal with it, I'm not sure, but this was at least my attempt to look at it straight in the face.
Well, how do you deal with it? Because some of the backlash and the criticism you have gotten for this film, and I do understand part of that, is that you don't push back enough. You show footage of Charlottesville, you know, the neo-Nazis marching through Charlottesville, and then he says something about both sides, you know, the Trump argument, and you basically cut to another scene. Is that fair criticism to say that you have not been tough enough for him?
You're asking me. I guess you're asking me because you just asked me.
No, I mean, I guess you say it's not fair criticism, otherwise you would have done it differently. But do you understand the argument?
It could be a completely fair criticism, and I could have done it this way, and could have done it differently. I chose to do it this way. It wasn't happenstance. It makes me think about interviews, what we expect from them, what we think can be achieved.
But this particular example, Charlottesville, why not push back more?
I think that I do push back on it, but let me try to address the question in some more general way. There's this idea of the difficult question. The interview is as confrontational, as argumentative, et cetera, and there are many confrontational and argumentative elements in American Dharma. It's actually tilted far more in that direction than any film I've ever made. It's not clear what you get in the end. I've seen, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 interviews with Steve Bannon. And the problem is not whether difficult questions have been asked. That's not the problem at all. It's a mistake. It's somehow blaming the interviewer for his unwillingness to deal with certain things, and his slipperiness, and his ability to just filibuster. I mean, I was well aware before this interview that he would go into a stump speech. I don't know how else to describe it.
The stuff he always says, his regular line, right?
The stuff that he says again and again and again and again. And so part of it is figuring out a way to break out of that, to create something different. Also, my interests, I think, are different. If I'm trying to create a picture of, I mean, I would much rather someone say to me, well, I don't get a feeling for Steve Bannon in this movie. I believe you've failed. You've unutterably failed to capture who this man is. But that's not what I hear. I hear what I would consider to be a kind of complaint that this isn't enough of an adversarial interview. I mean, people would probably be very happy. A lot of people would be very happy if I picked up a cinder block and hit him in the head. That's
the other opposite, but that was not what I was getting at. I mean, when he talks, when you ask him about good, and for me that's one of the strongest scenes in the film, when you ask him about good Bannon and bad Bannon, you know? Bannon. Good Bannon standing up for the little guy, bad Bannon having to acknowledge that the tax cut helps the rich and that the environmental stuff Trump is doing harms...
People criticize me endlessly for that.
Exactly. No, but and he is...
Why didn't you confront him at that point?
Well, yeah,
with his racism?
If I can finish my question. So his speeches at that point, which is exceptional for Steve Bannon, because he's not often speechless. He basically doesn't have an answer to your question. And I wanted to know what was eventually his answer, but you cut away.
I don't cut away.
Well,
what's interesting to me...
There's a lot more...
Wait, one moment here.
It's your stage. I'm waiting.
No. There's this idea that somehow I didn't give him an opportunity to answer. Often, and I did hear, because people complained about the fact I didn't give him an opportunity to answer, I say to him, what kind of a world do you want?
Sure.
And he does answer it with some kind of non-answer, which people think is him failing to answer. But he does answer. I'm thinking of taking it out. I think it has a reverse effect on how you actually perceive the material.
Just a brief, I mean, and again, I only spoke for them for a few hours. That got very combative, and I'm not at all suggesting that I got, you know, I hesitated after that whether that was the right approach. I mean, maybe the viewer didn't learn anything new from that interview, but I mean, he's a very difficult man to interview, at least if your goal is for your viewer to get to understand him better, or not.
Most people are I'm not going to speak for most people, but I think a lot of people, I think I can say that without fear of embarrassment, most people just want to see him confronted. They want to see someone do what they themselves would like to do, and that's yell at him, maybe even hit him.
You keep wanting to hit him. I'm not suggesting you hit him.
There's a film I just love, a documentary film. I'm sure it was shown here at some point. The Emperor's Naked Army Marches On. Do you know this film?
I don't know.
Yes, a wonderful film. Although people attacked that film. What's it about? It's about Mr. Okazaki, who's traveling Japan in a van covered with slogans. His brother was killed and eaten during World War II by his commanding officers, who were evidently extremely hungry. And he would like an apology from the emperor. You know, we're sorry that your brother was eaten. We will never do it again, or something like that. So you see Mr. Okazaki being filmed, interviewing various people. Kasui Hara, who made the film, is showing Okazaki. And it's Japan. People bow to each other. There's a conversation. At some point, Mr. Okazaki interrupts and says, "That's not an answer. An answer is yes or no." And it goes on a little bit. That's not an answer. The answer is yes or no. And then at a certain point, he jumps up and starts pummeling with his fists his interview subject. It's an interviewer's dream. We could try it here.
Yeah, we could try it. Somebody said we have 10 more minutes, so let's do that in 10 minutes. You can beat me up.
No. I was thinking it happened the other way.
You find that criticism bullshit. That's basically...
No, I don't find it bullshit. I find it...
Bullshitty-ish.
I find that I'm trying to do something different. And I'm not sure how confrontational questions would get me further along the exploration of who this man really is. And maybe I failed, I don't know, but I tried to do something different.
What was the
That's my excuse.
What was the... No excuse needed. What was the most revealing thing during the interview, whether it's in the film or not, for you yourself? You follow politics closely. You already knew a lot about Steve Bannon, I'm sure. What is the most, besides his taste in movies, although that revealed a lot as well, but what did you not know about Steve Bannon before entering this project that you do know now?
I'm always amazed by a certain level of self-satisfaction.
There were some signs about this guy, about his level of self-satisfaction.
I still don't know how he ever arrived at this. I mean, that's one of the great mysteries. What happened to him as a Goldman Sachs investment banker or as a Hollywood producer that set him on this course? A very, very, very angry course. I like to think that I'm very angry, but there are a lot of people a lot angrier than me, and the solutions that interest them are very different than mine. I guess it was the realization that this guy is so destructive, so intent on destroying things. I still find it kind of amazing.
But I'm sure you learned to understand it more while talking to him, maybe also off camera, or not?
No, he was no different on camera than off camera. Although occasionally he would joke about things. That moment when I talk about Donald Trump possibly being a crook, and he says he's not a crook. Huh? What? Are you for real here, sir? I think this is also held against me, that I could make him laugh. I told him at one point that I was very much in favor of the wall. And he raised an eyebrow.
Of the wall?
The wall.
The wall, Mexico-US wall, yeah?
That wall.
That wall.
And he raised an eyebrow. And he said, how is that? And I said, well, I'm planning to move to Mexico because I can't stand it here anymore. And the wall is the only thing that will protect me from those crazy American psychos, criminals, and rapists. I think it's a great idea. We were doing ADR, you know, additional dialogue replacement or whatever it stands for, and he had this book about China, the Great Wall.
Do you consider him an intellectual? Because he does consider himself one.
I don't know, what's an intellectual? Yeah, he reads books. Yeah, he's an intellectual. Yeah.
In that case, do you believe he looks down on Donald Trump, who I think it's fair to say he's not an intellectual?
Yeah, this I would have to agree with. Does he look down on Donald Trump? Yeah, I think he does.
But he sees him as a tool.
As a blunt instrument.
That's even better.
I know. Well, it's a certain, he's a little more specific. It's a certain kind of tool.
Right.
It's like hitting someone on the head with a 2x4. Somehow it lacks a level of subtlety. So he's reading,
you think?
I should finish my story very quickly.
Please.
He's reading his book, The Great Wall, and I mean, I have total, guess what? I have total contempt for this stuff. In case you're wondering. I would say...
I wasn't.
So I say, you know, the wall, that thing really did work. And again, how's that? And I said, you know, no Mexicans in China. Congratulations. I mean, what the hell is going on? I sometimes think of racism, I think of racism as being in really, truly execrable taste.
That's one way to phrase it.
Yeah, I wasn't brought up that way. I think there's a little bit of racism in everybody, but it's how you conduct yourself with respect to it. It's how you act in the world. And these people are, I mean, I'm terribly sorry. Hillary was right. There was a deeply deplorable element in all of this. But like Romney, you don't dismiss 50% of your electorate when you're running to be president of the United States. That is, unless you want to lose.
That said, only 6 more years. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
2 more years, he's very wrong.
Thanks, everybody, for coming. See as many films on this beautiful
Thank you so
festival
much.
as you can. Thank you, Errol Morris.
Is that okay?
Thanks a lot. I think they love the film.